Hello everyone. Today I'm bringing you a novel in which the Omega protagonist is in a loving relationship with Enforcer Will. But when the protagonist goes on an adventure in a rabbit hole, it unexpectedly triggers a strong out of control reaction from Will. Will spares no effort to search for the protagonist, digging frantically and even confining them in a small space. What deep affection and crisis are hidden behind this? Hurry up and join me in uncovering the mystery. Chapter 36. I settled into a weathered rocking chair on the pack house's wraparound porch, my fingers deftly working on into what I hoped would become a slipper. My heightened senses, a gift that set me apart even among Ongeza, allowed me to eavesdrop on the conversation taking place just beyond the porch steps. Our hospitable Alpha was concluding his customary tour of the town, highlighting recent improvements with pride in his voice. The visiting Alpha and Beta seemed intimately familiar with our territory, suggesting frequent visits. Despite the informal nature of their stay, the atmosphere remained relaxed, though I knew Will would be on high alert. As an enforcer, his duty to maintain peace extended to all Alphas, regardless of pack affiliation. As Roll and ushered the visiting Alpha inside for trade discussions, I observed the larger man following our leader into the house. The visiting Alpha instructed his Beta, a leaner man, to enjoy some downtime. My eyes tracked the supposed Beta as he lounged in a nearby lawn chair, his gaze sweeping over our quaint town. Something about the pair nagged at my instincts. I blinked slowly, reaching out with my unique sensing abilities to scrutinize both the man inside and my line of sight. Troubled by my findings, I reached out to Will through our mate bond. What does the visiting Alpha look like again? I inquired via our private mind link. Will's response came swiftly, accompanied by a mental image of the larger man. Why do you ask? His curiosity was palpable. I opened my mind fully, allowing him to perceive the conundrum I was grappling with. His shock reverberated through our bond as he processed the information. Is there any way your senses could be incorrect? He asked, a hint of disbelief coloring his thoughts. I sent a firm negative down the link. No, Roland and Emily are registering normally. There's no haze of confusion, so my senses are functioning perfectly. They also seem quite accustomed to this arrangement, if you consider it. It certainly provides them with a tactical advantage and an element of surprise. How frequently do they visit? The man who had entered the house radiated a Beta's aura, while the one lounging before me unmistakably exuded an Alpha's presence, despite his attempts to suppress and conceal it. My keen senses were it fooled. I realized that the pack's Ongeza, likely occupied with various duties and maintaining a low profile, wouldn't have connected faces to the auras they might have sensed. That is, assuming their abilities were refined enough to detect such nuances and they happened to be using them within sight of these two visitors. Will was still grappling with the revelation I had shared. These two visit quite regularly. Actually, at least 4 times a year, he admitted. Considering the power dynamics at play, I probed further. How did your enforcer senses miss this? I thought you could gauge anyone's fighting prowess. His response carried a tinge of embarrassment. I have to consciously activate that ability, and I only ever assess the Alpha. I never bothered with the smaller guy, assuming Alphas always outclass Betas in power. Though amused by his oversight, I refrained from comment, sensing he was already berating himself. Will's presence in my mind faded as he left to confer with Tony. I resumed my knitting, knowing it would take considerable time to complete the slipper given Will's substantial foot size. As I worked, I noticed Trevor, the visiting Beta, approach and take a seat beside me. Glancing up, I offered a polite greeting. How are you enjoying your stay so far? Ivy always enjoyed visiting this pack, he replied, his demeanor relaxed and at ease. Your group is consistently welcoming. How have things been around here lately? His craftiness was evident. I could sense how he had likely gleaned substantial information about our pack through casual conversations like this in the past. He exuded an aura designed to inspire trust and encourage openness. Thanks to my unique abilities, I could not only detect this influence but also shield myself from its effects. Pretty good. I kept knitting as I spoke. No real problems. It has been a good year for the gardens from what I hear. That is good to hear. Our carrots and beets did well this year. Was it the same here? His voice had just the right amount of interest to appear interested and yet polite. Most people loved to brag about their gardens, and prideful wolves loved to try and show how great their pack was. They wouldn't have even noticed the pull this man's aura was having on them. I felt his aura push a bit more, although it was still a very light influence. I could sense that his ability was much stronger if he chose to use it. I raised an eyebrow slightly at him while using my passive ability. I felt his shock as his aura and focus on me slid completely off. I dropped the ability and felt his astonished fall on me again. I pretended to not notice anything as I replied, I am not entirely sure since I only joined this pack a few weeks ago. He shook his head as if to clear it. Confusion and curiosity laced his voice as he asked, How did you do that? I could ask you the same question. I thought that the sociable abilities of betas were well known. He looked somewhat confused. I turned to examine his face as I were a parent who was doubtful of their teenager's story, and I felt him slightly squirm internally. I was somewhat impressed that he didn't growl at my stare since most alphas cowled and tolerate anyone doubting or challenging them. I thought that it was a well-known fact that anyone who lived as a rogue for a while could identify alphas and betas at a glance as easily as they could pick up lies, half-truth, and deceptions. It was a bold statement made with a trace of challenge in it, and as such, he would not even consider the fact that I could possibly be around or have an Omega past. It also gave him a semi-false lead so he wouldn't look too deeply into my little trick. He looked stunned and knew he had been caught. He started laughing. We had been doing this for over 3 decades, and you are the first one to notice. I grinned at his easygoing manner, relieved that he wasn't as stern as many alphas were. The beta Trevor was actually Alpha Trevor, while Mike was truly the beta. They had pretended to be the other role for some reason. I had never heard of an alpha who could swallow their pride enough to consider that, but this easygoing man had obviously done it many times. I was almost as surprised that this alpha had ignored my slightly challenging words. So why exactly did you do that? I inquired. I thought that I was losing it for a few seconds until I watched you for a bit. He leaned back in the chair and grinned at me. He looks more intimidating than me and is better at negotiations. His father was the previous beta and his mother was an enforcer's daughter. So he is nearly as strong alpha. I go collect information and find out which trades could get us the best deals, as I am very good at getting people to talk to me. Who have you told so far about your discovery? So far just the one enforcer. And he is off to talk to an older one to see if he noticed it in the past. He glanced at the mark on my shoulder and looked surprised. You didn't tell your mate first. Will is my mate, I replied, with a grin, his eyes wide and in surprise before laughing. Good for him. I bet you keep him on his toes. I try my best. He laughed again before shaking his head. What gave me away, though? He was truly curious. I tilted my head as I examined him for a moment. Lots of tiny things that are barely noticeable since you have toned them down. You pretended to be respectful of my position, but some of your body language still proclaimed who is truly in charge. Alphas have an unconscious attitude and body posture. You managed to hide most of it, but some is still there for those who know what to look for. I guess I had better work on that. I updated Will on the situation and he relaxed now that he had all the details. It turned out that Tony had no clue either. Trevor got to his feet and headed inside, likely heading to Roll and office to expose the truth that I had just dug up. I kept tabs on my senses, but Roll and took the news quite well from his old acquaintances, opting to be amused rather than outraged at the Chapter 37. Trevor and Mike had left in good spirits several days ago with the promise that we wouldn't blow their cover. The days settled down, and I began to learn more about the pack I was in. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed being part of a pack. I relaxed in the sun as I took a break in the trees behind the pack house. Will's face appeared in my mind's eye as I let mine wander. His smile and sense still distracted me something fierce. I somehow managed to love Will more with every passing day. and I smiled happily at that thought. I knew he was training the fighters today, and I debated about heading over to spy on them. I glanced down from my perch and saw that Tiffany was kissing a guy in a remote corner of the garden. They had just got back last night, and I hadn't met Nathan yet. I swung out of the tree carefully and wandered over. I tilted my head as I crossed my arms and leaned against a tree. I regarded them for a few moments before commenting. "How long before you to come up for air?" They both jumped. Nathan automatically moved into a defensive position in front of Tiffany with an instinctive low growl. Neither had heard my approach, and I had known it. I chuckled and waved a dismissive hand at him. "I am not interested in competing. I hope we all make it out of this life alive." He blinked in shock at my bizarre greeting. Tiffany groaned at the interruption before reassuring her new mate. "You can ignore her. Nathan, she is mostly harmless. Besides, her mate is an enforcer." Nathan's mind started working again as he processed the words mate and enforcer. He relaxed and went to sit beside Tiffany. Tiffany began the introduction. "Jade, this is Nathan, my mate. Nathan, this is Jade, my brother's mate." I came over while holding out my hand and he shook my hand. I was happy when Tiffany had no problems with the contact. "How did you sneak up on us like that?" Nathan inquired, looking at me in confusion. "I haven't had anyone get that close to me in years without me knowing about it." I sat on the grass cross-legged and grinned at him. "I lived as a rogue for a while, and I moved silently without thinking about it. You were also quite distracted." They both blushed a bit. I paused and glanced over my shoulder as I watched a black wolf trot along the tree line with her nose to the ground. I was silent as I watched her keep going, watching her in confusion. Tiffany asked, "What is Ruby doing?" "Don't talk so loud or she will hear you." I responded quietly. Nathan regarded my still form with a faint frown. "Why are you hiding from her?" As a former rogue, he would always be curious about any potential threat or trouble. I grinned at him, much to his surprise and confusion. I said, "In theory, I am not hiding from her. In reality, she is simply unable to find me." Tiffany looked more confused after my explanation than before it. "Why is she looking for you?" "I don't think I have ever met a fighter less into regular life." She turned over a new leaf. Tiffany snorted. "Yeah, sure. I will believe that when I see it. Just wait and see," I said, grinning in anticipation. "She has been around me almost constantly this last week." Tiffany blinked in surprise. I thought Will was easing up in the protection area. What happened? It was Will. Somehow she decided that helping me collect greens, mushrooms, and truffles was more fun than fighting training. Shaking her head in utter disbelief, she said, "Now I know you are lying. That simply isn't possible." Nath unfocused on me in curiosity. "Speaking of impossible things, how exactly did you know that I was in that valley?" With a faint sigh, I replied, "It is actually an ability that some Ongaza have. You aren't an Omega." I could feel his faint surprise. Tiffany quickly interjected. "She was designated as an Omega when she was with a different pack. Then she was a rogue for a while before she came here, since it was just a designation." I said, "The rank faded, but the abilities remained." "My sensing ability is pretty good, but the rest are weak." "Well, witch. I am in your debt for guiding her to me." I was shocked when she ran into the camp full tilt looking for me. He grinned at that memory. Tiffany blushed at his words. She had apparently been quite single-minded in her pursuit. I told Nathan. "Well, she gets to take you shopping now." I went through one torture session and that was enough for me. He blinked as Tiffany defended herself with a scoff. "Torture? You survived. Did you ever even use that lingerie? That is for me to know and for you to never find out." She scowled before her face lit up, and she turned to Nathan. "Oh, that reminds me. What kind of lingerie do you think would look best on me?" I laughed at his wide-eyed look. The mate bond was making him feel some lust, but the question was like a double-edged sword, and it had him quite uneasy. "Don't worry, Nathan. I snickered. Just tell her that you would have to see her in every piece she owns before you can give her your honest opinion. She probably has every type in existence. Nathan's eyes darkened as Tiffany blushed bright red. She exclaimed, "You aren't supposed to be helping him." I shook my head and muttered, well, that did it." Seconds later, a black wolf bounded into the garden. She glanced at Nathan and Tiffany before focusing on me eagerly. "There you are," she said. It looked like she was completely ignoring the other two at this point, but I knew better. "Sylvia says that there is an auction in a couple of days, and she's looking for more truffles. She is hoping we can get some good specimens over the next few days since there is a cooking competition coming up and numerous chefs with deep pockets will be there. Do you have time to go truffle hunting with me today?" Tiffany's jaw dropped as she overheard the conversation. I felt Ruby's amusement even though she gave no sign of it. I nodded just as eagerly as I swiftly got to my feet. These two are about to discuss Tiffany's current collection of lingerie, and anything that gets me out of the idiot vicinity is more than welcome. Tiffany's face flushed bright red. "That's it. You are so dead." She lunged towards me. I quickly shifted and dodged out of the way, taking her by surprise as she flew over me. Ruby chuckled before darting in and gently grabbing the scruff of my neck. She turned and bolted full tilt out of the garden with me in her jaws. I could feel Tiffany's shock at Ruby's action overriding her vengeance while poor Nathan seemed bewildered by what he had just witnessed. Chapter 38. Tiffany eyed up my companion at the supper table before turning to Will. "So," she said, "if I told you that Ruby had grabbed Jade by the scruff of her neck and dragged her off, what would you say?" Will continued to calmly butter his dinner bun. "If you are referring to the event earlier today, then I would tell her thank you." Nathan looked surprised. "How can you be so calm when someone grabs your mate by the scruff of her neck?" He was honestly curious. Whereas Tiffany was still attempting to get revenge, I let Will feel their emotions through the mate link so he wouldn't make an incorrect assumption about Nathan. Ruby lacked this knowledge, and I could feel her bristling at his innocent question as she sat beside me. Will grinned at him while replying, "Oh, in the beginning before she was marked, I probably would have flipped. It is a bit different now. For one, Jade doesn't mind it too much. 2, it got her out of the reach of my sister, something that you will appreciate one day. 3, Jade can't really defend herself. So Ruby's intervention was welcome." Nathan nodded slowly, still not quite understanding. Tiffany glanced at Ruby before turning back to Will. "Are you sure this is Ruby?" she asked. "This is not the Ruby that was here when I left to fetch Nathan." I snickered. Many people were equally confused lately. Most were quite bewildered by the changes in the formerly fierce and aloof Black Wolf. She had gotten much better at hiding the telltale hints of her elite fighting abilities. She was also finding this laid-back lifestyle to be more enjoyable and entertaining. She was no longer the die-hard fighter obsessed with patrols and training. Instead, she now spent no more time than the average wolf on the training field. Much to Will's amusement, she had arranged her free time so that she could accompany me into the forest 5 days of the week. Regardless of what I was hunting for, she came along with me. In truth, she was overly eager to learn any rogue secrets or skills I could show her. Since she was normally the only one accompanying me, she more or less had my undivided attention, so she was learning quickly. Her intense focus was present beneath the surface, but she didn't show it anymore, much to her own amazement. The first time she had smelled a truffle on patrol, she had felt such a surge of pride that she had been beside herself as she picked up that subtle scent. She could now pick up my scent if she crossed it, but I could go places she couldn't, and I still lost her easily enough. Much to her chagrin, Will shrugged as he responded to Tiffany's words. "As far as we can tell, it is still Ruby." Jade was teasing me that she was driving Ruby completely crazy, but at this point, I think Ruby has made a few round trips to that destination. Ruby turned to glare at him over my head while Will smirked at her, knowing he was egging her on. I sighed and put a hand on each of their arms as if separating them as I told both of them, "All right, children, settle down and get along." They both gave me a disbelieving look, incredulous that I would attempt to intervene when I was powerless to stop them. I felt a jolt of recognition from Nathan and glanced over at him. He was blinking in surprise. You mentioned that you were a rogue for a while. Did you ever meet a man named Jisk? That was one of his favorite quotes, and he said it almost the exact same way you just did. I grinned in pleasant surprise. Was it that obvious? Yes. I knew him, and that is where I picked it up from. Will's interest was piqued as he recognized the name. He looked at Nathan with interest. What do you know about Jisk? With a shrug, Nathan replied, I only met him a couple of times. Pretty fierce-looking guy, although he seemed pretty laid back. One hell of a fighter, too. He's one of the rogues that hunts the unlawful rogues. Has an nasty grudge against Alpha Command. He never did explain it, but it is the reason he refuses to join another pack. If the people started trying to rile each other up, he would say exactly what Jay just did. He turned to me. How did you meet him? I grinned at that memory. He had stuck his head into a small cave to investigate it, and didn't notice me behind him. When I hit PED, he jumped and banged his head. The most amusing part was that he blamed the cave roof as opposed to me. Nathan shook his head. There is no way you could have gotten close enough to that guy undetected to startle him. I was full grown. I said, so I was pretty tiny. He had heard me, but thought that I was a rabbit. It didn't occur to him that a runt would be in no man's land. How did you meet him? Nathan looked dubious, but accepted it. He stumbled across our camp a few times and stayed for a few hours to gossip. Ruby was listening attentively. I was pretty sure that she would be tracking down Nathan for other stories from when he had been a rogue. I was going to drive Tiffany to distraction since Ruby was unmated. Right on cue, Ruby started asking him for other stories he had. I leaned against Will and simply listened to the two talk. He wrapped his arm around me as he listened to stories from a world he had never known. Chapter 39. I leaned against a tree and silently fumed. It was doubtful that anyone realized I was leaning against a tree just off to the side of the field. Will was training an older teenager on how to correct his form while going through a certain fighting move. And was he concentrating hard enough that he was unaware of my mood? It was to his credit that he was also mostly unaware of the blonde trying to flirt with him. He had noticed a couple of her attempts, but was completely uninterested and ignored her. It was the only mollifying thing in this situation. I couldn't exactly act like the jealous mate that I was, since I was unable to win a fight with anyone here. No amount of training could correct that either as a runt. My speed, strength, and stamina would never be equal to a normal wolf. Sure, I had a few tricks up my sleeves in case I got cornered by unpleasant rogues, but those generally involved serious injuries or possibly even lethal results. Seriously harming a pack made out of jealousy, when my own mate was ignoring the perpetrator, was something that couldn't even be considered. I didn't really want her dead, I just wanted her to leave my mate alone. Why couldn't she go flirt with Evan? He didn't have a mate yet, and as an enforcer, his odds were extremely low of ever finding her. I took a deep breath to control the jealousy and gave a barely audible low whistle of greeting to the one hiding in the tree next to me. Even in my distraction, the faint whiff of pine and alder had not gone unnoticed. Even if my nose hadn't told me of his presence, my senses had been tracking him for some time now as he circled closer and closer. I didn't remove my eyes from Will as I sensed Jisk drop out of the tree to lean against a tree trunk barely out of my reach. He regarded the fighters silently for a while before speaking quietly. Do I have to give him a lecture on the exclusivity of the mate bond? It didn't surprise me that he knew who my mate was. He had crossed this pack's territory dozens of times that I knew of, and I didn't go that far from the pack house. He probably knew each fighter on sight and had an idea of their skills by now. Not really. I relied. With a deep sigh, his eyes have never wandered, and I couldn't have wished for a better mate. That blonde is getting on my nerves, though. I didn't realize what an evil beast jealousy is. I have no idea how Will managed to control himself when we first met. He chuckled lightly, although I could sense his serious mood beneath. He knew I could sense it and didn't care in the least. There had been a few times where he had asked me to dig deep into his mind to determine exactly what his deepest feelings were on a controversial subject, I hadn't managed to dodge both Will and Ruby to get far enough out into the forest to say hello the few times I had sensed him nearby, and he was undoubtedly aware of it. I also knew that his appearance was a light thing, since anyone who looked this way would be able to see him at the moment. He preferred to remain unseen, but his irritation was coming through his surface thoughts clearly. I knew very well that he considered the mate bond a sacred thing. The fastest way to anger him was for someone to try and infringe on a mate bond. For someone to try and entice someone who was already mated would make him somewhat mad. Something like this blonde was doing. If someone who was already mated tried flirting with anyone other than their mate, he got livid and generally tried to take a chunk out of the offender. And heaven help the person who was contemplating rejection or mentioning rejection as a possibility within his hearing. He crossed his arms and asked me in a loud voice, "Exactly how long is your mate going to let the blonde flirt with him before telling her off?" His eyes never left the training field. His voice had been deliberately loud, and every head on the field whipped in the direction of the unfamiliar and irritated voice. The field fell silent. I shrugged and replied in a monotone voice, not quite as loud as he had been, "I am not sure, but I am hoping she stopped flirting with him soon." At this point, everyone was now aware that the blonde had been flirting with Will. Some had noticed it before. Will's eyes were nearly black as he noticed a trespassing rogue beside his mate. I felt Will's worried mind probe cross the mate bond to check if I was okay. I felt his surprise that I was the least bit uneasy in this stranger's presence. I sent amusement back at him. "Relax. It is only Jisk. At the moment, the blonde is the only person he wants to pick a bone with." My words helped reassure him that I was in no danger, but it did make him worry for the blonde's safety. That irritated me, and I let him sense the emotion at its cause. His chagrined, wordless response acknowledged my point, but also pointed out that as an enforcer, he would have to intervene if Jisk attacked her. I was entirely certain that even Will was a match for the experienced rogue, but I heavily shielded that thought, lest he catch it. The blonde hesitated with the attention she was getting before squaring her shoulders and deciding to take her stand. She addressed me. "You should go run off with that rogue. He seems interested enough in you. I will look after Will. He needs a strong wolf as a mate, not a runt. Having a runt around makes our pack look weak, especially when that runt is paired up with an enforcer." I growled in rage at the insult, but it was drowned out by an enraged roar from Will and a furious snarl from Jisk. Numerous other growls cut off, as most stared at the two livid males who radiated power in their furious mood. The blonde's eyes had wide-eyed in fear as she realized that all of the sounds had been directed at her. I could feel Will's surprise at Jisk's reaction, partially snapping him out of his rage. I winced as dozens of people mirrored similar powerful emotions of outrage, anger, and disbelief at the woman's callous words. I shielded my senses somewhat from the stomach, churning emotions. Jisk slowly stalked forward in a slight smooth crouch that showed him for the deadly predator that he was. Growls still shook the air around him as his eyes were locked onto the blonde. Jisk glared at her, and his voice shook with cold fury. "How dare you infringe on a mate bond? What of your own mate? He is out there somewhere waiting for you, unaware that you are trying to shatter his heart." The blonde was shaken by his approach, but her packmates were outraged by her comments and gave her no support. Such behavior was not tolerated, and I had a feeling that the others had not been aware of her opinion previously. "She is a runt. She makes our pack look weak. Besides, an enforcer needs a strong mate, not a weakling like her." Despite her strong words, she was slowly backing up while in a slight defensive crouch. Will's loud snarl and shaking hands told me of his opinion. Will's crumbling self-control was stopped by his surprise when Jisk gave an even louder snarl and lunged up to move. Jisk didn't touch her, but snarled in her face, his furious black eyes causing her to scramble backwards in panic, with him matching her step for step. His snarling words were clear for anyone watching. "You disgust me, trying to claim one already mated in front of his own mate. I am glad that you are not my mate. You probably won't even remain faithful to him once you find him." That was a massive insult in the wolf world, An unfaithful mate was generally scorned and ridiculed. With such an audience, the insult by a rogue and story of her actions would spread fast. She would probably move to another distant pack within the week. Jisk paused in his pursuit, and she scrambled backward before shifting and bolting off into the undergrowth. He turned his smoldering eyes to Will, who shifted his stance as Jisk's challenging stare fell on him. Jisk advanced on Will slowly, and Will eased into a defensive stance, ready for an attack. Jisk snorted at his actions, as if I would hurt an old friend by attacking her mate. Jisk paused in his advance as he studied Will. I could feel Will's conflicted emotions and confusion through the mate bond. He was equally confused by my lack of concern. I dropped my shield so that he could see that I knew Jisk would not seriously injure him. Jisk knew that the blonde was mostly to blame. Mostly. Jisk spoke in a cold tone to Will. In the future, I highly advise you growl at anyone attempting to flirt with you. Your silence was encouraging that lowlife and was definitely ticking off your mate. Your jealous mate may not be able to fight off an interloper, but she could probably make you regret the mistake of letting someone encroach on the mate bond. Will's eyes narrowed at his tone, but I could feel his shame as he realized how Jisk saw the situation. Will's mind touched mine, and without my shields, he examined my emotions. I felt his guilt as he noticed the jealousy and faint traces of hurt from his actions. Will looked away from Jisk, wordlessly admitting that Jisk had won that battle of words. Jisk turned to go, but paused and looked over his shoulder at Will. His voice was softer, and quiet enough that only Will and I could hear him. Never take your mate for granted. An understanding mate is worth more than gold. Runts are even more valuable since they put their trust and faith in their mates. When they have no real defenses if one decided to abuse such trust, they completely depend on their mate to defend the mate bond. And if an enforcer can't defend a mate bond, then we might as well just hand this world over to the ferals and be done with it. Will was startled by his words, but didn't speak. Jisk continued walking towards the forest edge, where I was still leaning against the tree. I turned my head to examine him as he walked by. I will see you later, I murmured. He gave a barely audible whistle of agreement. He disappeared from view, and I sensed him pick up speed as he worked to make his passage raceable. Will reached me and pulled me into a hug while dropping his face to my neck, breathing my scent as he relaxed. I am sorry. He apologized. It never occurred to me how my actions would have affected you. She was relatively new to the pack, and I was aware that she thought so lowly of Runt. Can you forgive me? The emotions of others on the field vary from curiosity to suspicion as they watched the trees where Jisk had disappeared. The presence of the unknown and unpredictable rogue had them off balance. I sensed a few ease into the trees as they tried to track and intercept the potential threat. I knew they didn't stand a chance of catching him. I leaned my head against Will's chest. You're forgiven. Please don't let others flirt with you, though. My voice turned more teasing. I might have to do something rash, like find a bear and mind link you a picture of it looking at me. I bet that would give me your undivided attention. He took a deep breath and shuddered lightly at my idea. How about we don't do that? You can just mind link me and tell me to snap out of it. Or, I murmured in a contemplative tone, I could mind link you an image of my reflection in the mirror while wearing that set of silver lingerie I bought. I felt his surprise and must rise like a tidal wave. You own lingerie. I chuckled in response. It was your sister who took me shopping. There was no avoiding it. Will's emotions were in a whirlwind. Training had dropped to the very bottom of his to-do list. Chapter 40. I flicked an ear back and tried to pick up my pace. It didn't help. With a sigh, I came to a stop and turned around before sitting, facing back the way I had come. Within moments, the black wolf bounded down the trail to skidded to a stop in front of me with a grin. I wolf grinned back at her. Ruby was catching on very fast at this point. She would be the equal of most experienced rogues when it came to tracking and hiding her trail. People were slowly getting used to her more laid-back style, and they had also started underestimating her in fighting practice, much to Ruby's amusement. I tilted my head innocently. Fancy meeting you out here. You seem to be in a good mood today. She chuckled, and her falsely enthusiastic voice sounded in my mind. A coincidence? I am sure. How can one not be happy on a day like today? The sun is shining and the birds are singing. I replied in a dry, ironic tone. The fact that you currently have Tony, Evan, Will, and half a dozen others looking for you, while being unable to locate you due to your carefully honed skills, has nothing to do with it either. Correct. Nothing whatsoever. She grinned back. I shook my head in a mute. That is good. Otherwise, I would warn you that Will has realized that you are with me, and they are heading this way with all the speed that the enforcers can muster. She blinked and darted off into the trees. Got to go. See you later. I snickered and trotted the other way. I tilted my head as I regarded something at the base of a willow tree. I wondered what Will would think if I crawled down this rabbit burrow. I paused in the tunnel as I sensed Will approach. As he ran by, he realized that the direction of the mate bond was down. I felt his curiosity and confusion as he asked, "Where are you?" I sent amusement and a childish sense of adventure along the link, sharing the feeling of dirt in my fur as I explored deep beneath the surface. I replied, "I am exploring this rabbit's burrow. You should see all of the tunnels down here." Apparently that was the wrong answer. I practically felt his heartbeat surge and sensed the soundless snap across the mate bond. He lost control as the mate bond and enforcer abilities ganched up on him. He swiftly located the rabbit burrow entrance and started digging for all he was worth. His mind washed exactly sane at this point, and I really said he really needed some time to calm down. I quickly went out one of the rabbit's emergency exits. Will was so obsessed and out of it that he didn't even notice. I climbed into the tree above him to watch. Tony and Evan remained at the edge of the clearing to watch while as the rest kept going after Ruby. They wanted nothing to do with an enforcer who was in control. I didn't blame them. I mind-linked Tony. Why is he like this? I haven't seen him like this since before the bond was completed. I was aware that he could truly lose control once the bond was completed. I felt Tony shrug through the link. You being out of his reach has always pushed him over the edge. In the past, he could always see you, but this time he couldn't, and it has hit him harder. Even with the bond completed, mates can lose control. It is just much harder to reach that point. Although with you being a runt and him being an enforcer, it is much more likely than average. I rolled my eyes. He could have mentioned it earlier. It didn't take Will long to uncover the entire network of tunnels, which was quite impressive considering how deep some of them went. He hadn't found me underground and started to lose control even more, snarling and lashing out at trees in a mindless rage. I had never seen him like this before, and from the emotions I was sensing, Evan and Tony were also stunned. I was really going to have to start thinking my plans through beforehand, now that I knew he could still lose control over such a minor thing as me exploring in a location where he couldn't see me or easily get to me. Will, nothing. I couldn't get through the mind link. His overreaction and intense focus had raised strong mental shields. I climbed down to try and calm him down. He glanced over his shoulder as he caught my movement out of the corner of his eye. The second he saw me, his eyes widened as he spun around and lunged at me. He used one of his massive paws to whip my feet out from under me, and I hit the ground with a grunt. He knocked me flat on the ground and crouched low over me, his belly fur brushing my clothing and skin. I heard a ripping snarl from above, and I rolled my head to the side to see Tony and Evan drop their heads and back up until their wolves were out of sight in the trees. We can't approach him when he's like this, Tony said in frustration. Try to calm him down, and let us know when he returns to the realm of reason. I rubbed my hands on Will's stomach. Take it easy. I am fine. I was never in danger. His never-ending growling showed that he wasn't buying it. I mind-linked Tony. Calm him how? He is blocking the mind link, and my spoken words aren't getting through to him. His enigmatic reply was of no use. You are his mate, you will manage. Gee, thanks. I rolled onto my stomach and started to wiggle my way out from under Will. His growls turned to snarls as he moved so that he was once more above me and lowered himself until he lightly pinned me to the ground. He wasn't letting me go anywhere, probably worried I would roll down another rabbit burrow. I sighed at the situation I have gotten myself into. Will, can you please let me up? Will. His snarls had receded to unceasing low growls. He did not respond to my words. My senses told me that he didn't even really hear me. He was so far out of it that he was at an instinctive level. I sighed as I crossed my arms in front of me and propped my chin on my arms to wait. A rock dug into my ribs and dirt dropped out of Will's fur, courtesy of his frantic digging earlier. I was starting to get mildly annoyed. I had run hard earlier with Ruby, and I was tired. I simply didn't have the reserves of a normal wolf. It was irritating, especially when dealing with an enforcer who was almost tireless. Earth to Will, I muttered as I reached out to gently tug on a tuft of fur on his ankle. He was not impressed and put a bit more weight on me as continued growling at the trees where Tony and Evan had disappeared. His weight was uncomfortable now. I tried to wiggle out. To no avail. I cowled and even budge. The rock under my ribs was starting to dig in painfully. I shifted into my wolf form, and sighed in relief now that the rock was no longer attempting to drill a hole into my ribs. My shift distracted Will for a second, but not in a good way. The disappearance of my physical contact had him in a frenzy again, thinking that I had once more disappeared, further goading the mate bond into a larger overreaction. He stood up to look underneath him, although his murderous glare softened the second he realized that I had simply switched forms. I felt his instinct shift. Previously they had been protective and defensive. Now they shifted to evasion and escape with a strong undertone of protectiveness. In a lightning-fast move, he grabbed the scruff of my neck and took off at speeds that had me frozen in terror. The smell of my fear pushed him into new speeds in his determination to put as much distance between us and where we had been, as if his imagined threat was back there. I could sense Stoney and Evan trying to keep up, but they were simply unable to reach the speed that Will was hitting with the mate bond spurring him on. They fell back and simply tracked his scent. Chapter 41. Will's headlong flight didn't slow until he came to a large cave dug into the side of a hill. Well, it was large by my standards. Will could barely squeeze down the tunnel, and there was barely room for him to curl up in the tight location. He somehow managed to get inside and curled up before finally putting me down, nuzzling me gently. He wiggled a bit and ended up curling around me in the tight space. It was like lying in the middle of a giant furry donut. His shoulders completely blocked the entrance, so I wasn't going anywhere until he let me. He sighed and buried his nose in my fur again. The tongue almost half my size started licking my fur. I made a face, but didn't bother commenting since his mental shields were still up. Tony's voice entered my mind. How are you holding up? I can't believe we'll actually manage to fit into that hole. He was torn between concern for me and laughing at Will's accomplishment of squeezing his massive bulk into the narrow space. The situation was just too ironic, and I said, for someone who freaked when I climbed into a tight space, I find it hard to believe that he just pulled a similar stunt. I am currently getting a bath. Feel like trading places with me. Tony's chuckled, and I felt his amusement clearly in his reply. Nope, just keep hanging in there. I sighed. I hadn't really thought that either of them could help me. Will would probably turn them into a scratching post in his current mood. The fur on my face, neck and back went from dry to damp, and from damp to soaked with Will's cleaning. About the time that my fur simply cowled didn't get any wetter. Will's mental shields dropped as he regained control. He blinked slowly at me as awareness finally appeared in his eyes. His mind voice was slow and confused. What just happened? Good question, I said, nuzzling his cheek. I was exploring and having a great time with Ruby when you jumped off the deep end. He huffed as my words triggered his memory. You were stuck in a rabbit burrow. I could feel the sides of the burrow pushing against you from all sides through the mind link. What did you expect? You cannot tell me that Ruby was in those tunnels with you either. I knew he would have felt the dirt in my fur, but it hadn't occurred to that he would pick up just how tight of a squeeze that section of the tunnel is. Then the image of him attempting to somehow stuff Ruby into one of those tunnels made me chuckle. No, you would have found her as she was. But alas, she wouldn't fit. She was nearby, though. I had more room in most of those burrows than you have in here. I was not stuck either. That is why you couldn't find me underground. He exhaled in irritation. I shook my head, causing my ears to flap and sending small droplets flying from my fur. Will blinked as they hit his face and fur, distracting him. Why is your fur soaked? Gee, I wonder why. I said, with my tongue hanging out in a wolf grin. It surely couldn't have anything to do with the couple thousand kisses I got over the last 5 minutes. I felt his surprise. Somehow I don't recall that. Well, I can honestly tell you that there isn't anyone else in here. Will glanced around and examined the rather snug den he now found himself in. Exactly how did I get in here? I shrugged. That is a mystery for another day. Let me go out first so you don't have to worry about squishing me in your attempts to get out. He wiggled to the side to unblock the entrance. Once Will had moved enough, I crawled over his side and trotted out the tunnel. Near the tunnel entrance, I reared up on my back legs, but was unable to touch the roof of the tunnel with my front paws. Tony chuckled at my display from where he lay at the base of a tree across from the entrance. I trotted over, prancing a little for extra effect. I made it out. He grinned at me with his tongue lolling out the side of his mouth. So I see. I am waiting to see how Will manages. He will probably shift and crawl out. Tony shook his head. After losing control like that, he won't be able to shift for a bit. I blinked slowly. Oh, this could be interesting then. Tony grinned and I turned to face the entrance. We listened to scratching and muffled noises coming from the tunnel. Will eventually grumbled. This is impossible. There is no way I could have gotten into this tunnel in wolf form. Tony yipped faintly in amusement. Well, you did. You managed it while carrying Jade too. Will snorted, unimpressed with his mentor's claim. How long until I can shift? It might just be easier to wait. Not long. About 10 minutes, give or take. But I think I will wait. I sent my surprise down the mind link, exclaiming, Hey, that is no fair. You freaked out when I was roaming around in that rabbit tunnel. But when you are actually the one stuck in a tunnel, it is a different story. Will contemplated it for a bit. Odd as it seems, me being stuck doesn't bother me. You being potentially trapped is a different story. I shook my head. Unbelievable. You do realize that the chances of a bear or cougar sneaking up behind me when I am out here is far more likely than when I was down in the rabbit burrow. Right. Will's mind voice was tight with that thought. I am sure that Tony can protect you from bears and cougars for the next 10 minutes. I glanced up at the tree above me. It was pretty big, but it also gave me an idea to further torment Will. I shifted and quickly climbed up while Tony watched me in suspicion. What are you? Tony asked with misgiving. I sat on a big branch and shifted back to my wolf form before lying down on the wide branch. I grinned down at Tony's wide eyes. He apparently never realized, until now, that I could shift so easily in a tree and not fall out. I am getting a good seat to watch the upcoming show. Jade, what are you up to? Will had been listening, and from his voice, he sounded as if he suspected that he really didn't want to know the answer. I bared my teeth in a grin as I replied, Nothing I haven't done before. And no, before you ask, I am not in any danger. That alone made Will quite worried. What you are doing? Just laying down and watching the tunnel. He was still suspicious. Then why did Tony seem concerned? I shrugged even though he couldn't see the motion. I guess Tony didn't realize that I was actually part cat. Will gave up interrogating me and focused on Tony. What is she doing? Tony kept his voice calm. She is fine. You can see what she is up to when you come out of that tunnel. I heard Will's mental and physical growl. He was starting to get agitated. You two are hiding something from me. I tilted my head, letting my mischievousness be felt. Not really. If you come out here, it is quite obvious. He was losing patience, and his voice held a warning tone. I sighed. All right. Just don't blow a gasket. I have done this thousands of times. I sent an image of my view of the tunnel. He would be able to tell that I was in a tree. His voice was shaking from worry. If you look down, will I see shoes or paws? I grinned. I can show you whatever you want to see. That was not what I wanted to hear. With a few grunts and groans, Will squeezed out of the tunnel in wolf form in a way that looked painful. He spotted me instantly as he started heading in my direction. Don't move. I will come and get you. I rolled my eyes, but remained where I was. Fine. I will let you play the knight in shining armor. I waited in amusement to see the outcome of his decision considering his current predicament. He immediately realized that he still couldn't shift and turned to stare at Tony. With a chuckle, Tony shifted and climbed into the tree before carefully picking me up and taking me back to ground level. Will immediately came over to nuzzle me as Tony put me down. I lay down in the grass and surprised myself with a big yawn. Today had really worn me out. Will sighed as if he was as tired as I was. Let's head back, he said. Tony and I followed him, walking beside him in wolf form. Chapter 42. You are going to be the death of me one day. Will was still grumbling as he walked beside me holding my hand. Once more in human form. I shook my head. You were supposed to chase Ruby, not ruin my exploration. From what I could sense through the mate bond, you were stuck. It is dangerous down in those tunnels. If one of them collapses or caves in, we might not be able to get to you fast enough. I rolled my eyes as I continued walking. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I have never gotten stuck in a burrow for more than a few moments. And if I did, I could have called for help. I have never had a tunnel collapse while I was in it. Keep in mind that when I was a rogue, I went into rabbit burrows and climbed trees on a daily basis. I even slept in a rabbit burrow almost every night. You didn't have to destroy the rabbit's home like that. The poor thing is going to be traumatized for life. Will stubbornly defended his actions. As far as I knew, you were stuck. I couldn't see you, and I thought something was wrong. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get to you fast enough. Tony shook his head as he idly commented, I am thankful that I never ended up with a runt for a mate. I narrowed my eyes and poked him in the ribs. What do you mean by that? The older man wasn't at all intimidated and chuckled at my actions. The fact that you can fit into places that I haven't been able to since I was 6 months old still boggles my mind. I can't imagine having a mate that can literally disappear down a rabbit hole. I nearly thought that Will had lost his sanity when I saw him ripping up the ground like a madman. At first, I thought you had gotten stuck down there until I saw you in the tree above him. So I really couldn't figure what had to him to send him over the edge like that. Will grumbled. How was I supposed to know that she had gone out a different exit? I was just following the various tunnels trying to find her. Tony looked at me with raised eyebrows, amused now that everything had settled down. He said, It looks like you are going to have to start avoiding places where he can't follow or reach you. This seems to be a constant and major trigger point for him. I shook my head while protesting. But keep away is my favorite game. Are you sure we can't work on this slowly and see if we can wean him out of it? Tony tilted his head in contemplation. You can try, but I doubt it is going to help. Please give us warning before you attempt it, though. Will shook his head, and I repeat myself. You are going to be the death of me one day. We just grinned at him. After supper, Will and I escaped to relax in front of the fireplace. He had been teased quite a bit over dinner about today's events. Many people were still going over to see the massive hole that Will had dug while searching for me. I leaned my head against his shoulder as he fiddled with a strand of my hair obsessively. I was half asleep already. Will groaned and sat up straighter. I hate to say it, but duty calls once again. Why do they always wait until evening to get into arguments? I sat up to lean against the side of the couch, regarding him sleepily, because they are too busy during the day. I am pretty sure if you drop a few hints about them disturbing your evening with your mate, they might take the warning, especially if they knew that their antics would be mostly ignored if they postponed such stunts until they were near the border, provided that they didn't do any serious damage to one another. I think I shall do that. Be back soon. Will smiled at me and leaned down to put a kiss on my forehead. I yawned again. I am going to find the washroom and come back to wait for you. If I fall asleep, it is your fault for being too slow. He chuckled as he headed out of the room. I shook my head to clear it before heading to the washroom. Note to self: busy days and big meals are exhausting. I entered the washroom and sighed while shaking my head. Someone had used all of the toilet paper and didn't replace the roll. It was a good thing that I had noticed when I had entered the room. I crouched down to dig under the sink for another roll. I paused as I examined a small pink box. I did a quick mental tally and narrowed my eyes. I pulled a small object out of the box and grabbed a roll of toilet paper before heading to the toilet. I examined the stick while I washed my hands. One line. That meant that I was not pregnant. I was sure whether to be relieved or disappointed, considering how alive and well my love life was with Will. It was only going to be a matter of time until a child appeared. I was sure what protection or preventatives Will might have used. He probably hadn't bothered. Most enforcers rarely had more than 2 or 3 children, even if they found their mate. Enforcers seemed to have gotten the short end of the family life. I wrapped the test in more toilet paper and stuck it in my pocket. Some people were just too curious and would actually search the bathroom garbage just so they would have something to gossip about. I had learned that startling fact when I had been an Omega. I didn't want to be in their gossip chains, so I would dispose of it in a different garbage. I headed back to the couch, and it was long until Will joined me. He sighed as he pulled me into his lap. I leaned against his broad chest. The warmth coming off of his chest was relaxing. I think this group finally got the message to conduct such annoyances well away from the pack house. What did you say? He grinned with a wicked glint in his eyes. I told them that if they interrupted my cuddle time with my mate one more time, that they would be training with me all day for a solid week just to ensure that they would simply not have enough energy to think about such actions. Needless to say, they readily agreed with me after that. I laughed. Oh, that would scare them. Nothing like having an irritated enforcer determined to work you until you dropped from sheer exhaustion. Will wrapped his arms around me and leaned back slightly, pulling me so I was lying on his chest. I abscessed patterns along his forearm as my eyelids got heavier. Will hummed lightly and the sound dragged me to sleep against my will. I dimly felt him carry me upstairs to bed. Chapter 43. I rolled over and gently poked Will's chest. My voice was sleepy as I mumbled, "Why exactly did you set your alarm clock so early this morning?" "I have a meeting with the Alpha before he has to leave." He groaned, still barely awake enough to talk. Well, your alarm has been going off for 10 minutes now." "What? Why didn't you wake me sooner?" He quickly got out of bed and grabbed his clothes. I sat up and stretched while watching him drowse idly. "It was your alarm clock. How was I supposed to know why you set it so early? Even I'd get up this early if I have any say in the matter." Will swiftly left the room to shower. I shook my head in amusement and got out of bed. Will had been kind enough to place my clothes on the dresser for me. I grabbed my pants and shook them out. Something clattered on the floor. I looked down. The pregnancy test had come out of the toilet paper and both were now lying on the floor. I sighed and bent over to grab them. I glanced at the object in my hand and froze. Where did the second line come from? I frowned in confusion. There had only been one line last night. Maybe it had been defective. I hadn't looked at the instructions. Did I do something wrong? I had never had to use one of these things before. I shook my head and quickly got dressed. I headed to the washroom on this floor and checked under the counter. Most pack houses had first aid supplies and pregnancy tests in every bathroom. The same brand was in this bathroom as well. I picked up the box to read the instructions. My eyes widened as I realized that this brand needed at least 15 minutes to develop the results. I had only waited as long as it took me to wash my hands. I read further. The one line appeared immediately to show that the test is working. The second line would indicate pregnancy and took time to react. This brand tested for a certain hormone, and it would only show positive if that hormone was present. I tried another test just to double check, carefully watching the clock on the wall. I stuck both tests in my pocket before retreating to the bedroom. My mind was whirling. No wonder I had seemed more tired the last few days. That was an early indicator I was going elsewhere. I was pregnant. This was not how I had planned to start my morning. I was peeling potatoes in the kitchen, but my mind kept drifting back to the 3 pregnancy tests hidden upstairs. I had used a different brand just to double-check the results, carefully following the instructions. It also told me that Will and I would need more than 1 bedroom before the year was out. I focused my senses within myself, with a lot of concentration, and I finally located the light in my body that was not mine. Barely weak-souled. The light flickered very faintly and was almost invisible within the glow of my own body. I almost dropped the peeler and took a long drink of water as I focused my senses more intensely to take a closer look. 2 flickers. Twins. I put the now empty glass down and continued slowly peeling potatoes. Luckily, I was the only one here at the moment, so there wasn't anyone to notice my distraction. My mother had once told me that twins were common in the maternal line on her side of the family tree. It looked like my runt gene had not overridden the hereditary legacy. I sighed. I was surprised that the tests had even picked them up this early on. It would be at least 3 more weeks before my sense shifted enough for others to start noticing. Possibly more, since my personal scent was normally weak. I lowered my nose to my shoulder and took a deep breath. I could just barely pick up the faintest trace, even at that close distance when I knew exactly what scent I was searching for. Ruby might be able to pick it up in a week or so if she was paying attention, considering how she always tracked my scent to see if I had been up to any new rogue tricks. She stood the best chance out of anyone. Luckily, she wasn't the type to say anything to anyone else. How was I going to break the news to Will? I knew that he would be thrilled. Kids were rare in an enforcer family. Tommy had already mentioned that the day he found out I was pregnant, he was moving to a different pack for a year. He had shown me the records for the alpha with the runt mate when she had been expecting. Both the alpha and his mate had to leave the pack for several months since the protective tendency with both the runt gene and pregnancy sent the male's mate bond way overboard. That was putting it mildly. I wondered if yesterday's episode with Will had anything to do with my newly discovered condition. Even if the male was unaware, the mate bond would alter his behavior as the delivery time came closer. I shook my head as I dismissed the unlikely thought. He thought that I was stuck in a tunnel deep underground. Besides, knowledge of the pregnancy seemed to trigger the overprotective tendencies more than the subconscious awareness. The moment he knew I was pregnant would likely be the turning point, and he would likely try to restrict my actions and movements as well as becoming even more overprotective just out of concern for my safety and well-being. There went my days of squeezing down rabbit burrows for the next while. I silently grinned. With twins, I likely wouldn't even be able to fit into a rabbit burrow in a couple of months. I finished the last of the potatoes and grabbed a banana before heading out for a run in the nearby forest. I decided to enjoy my freedom while it lasted. As always, Ruby seemed to know the moment I left the pack house, and she came to find me. I suspected that one of the Ongeza mind linked her whenever I left the pack house. At least Will's current protective measures were usually pretty subtle. I was pretty sure he had spoken to the Ongeza and Ruby quite some time ago to set up this arrangement. I knew the scouts continued to scour the forest for large predators and chase them outside of the borders, but that wouldn't stop Will from worrying. I grinned at Ruby and darted under a bramble bush before taking off full tilt in an attempt to lose her. She attempted to pick up my scent while I used my Omega abilities to try and stay several steps ahead of her. It gave me an unfair advantage that she still wasn't aware of. I made sure to stretch my legs as I gracefully bounded over obstacles. Within months, I would be reduced to a walk if Will had any say in the matter.